The Sudanese lived a year full of great events and high hopes for a smooth democratic transition, ending decades of military coups that were interspersed with a short civil truce, only to return to the circle again, and the echo of military music re-emerges, declaring a new inspiring leader, proud of the medals and stars that adorn his shoulder and chest. The people will experience both things, then the people will revolt against him and take him out of the game. With this stalemate, more than half a century of the country's history has been lost, which, since the colonial exit, has been experiencing tests without severing the connection with the old, but rather restoring it in the same patched dress. On the third anniversary of the revolution, Sunday, December 19, 2021, hundreds of thousands of protesters arrived in the vicinity of the presidential palace, to demand the residents of the presidential palace to leave it and vacate the place for new leaders who can achieve the goals of the revolution. But the palace residents, instead of hearing the loud voice of the people, directed their forces and their military machine towards the bare chest of the freedom-demanding, killing and wounding hundreds, and practicing all forms of violence, repeating the experience of dispersing the sit-in of the General Command on June 3, 2019. The December 2018 revolution raised slogans freedom, peace, and justice, and the revolutionaries and the people entrusted the matter of achieving it to civilian and military leaders according to a known and agreed upon partnership document, the constitutional document, but disputes arose between the civil and military components, which led to the formation of two governments in less than 2 years ago. They failed to achieve any of the slogans of the revolution, so that each side threw the glove of accusation of failure in the face of the other. The military say that civilians have failed, and civilians bear responsibility for the military, and everyone forgets that they are partners who bear the responsibility together. The year marked the departure, the actual confrontation between the civilian and military partners began. After the experience of signing the Juba peace agreement between the transitional government and armed movements that were fighting the Islamist regime that was toppled by the revolution, the people's expectations of reaching the slogans of their revolution rose, but soon the frustration with the government's performance, both civil and military, returned to dominate the scene again. Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok formed his second government on February 8 from partisan competencies, so Jibril Ibrahim, head of the Justice and Equality Movement, was appointed Minister of Finance, and other party leaders were appointed. 3 leaders of the armed struggle movements were named members of the Sovereignty Council, in implementation of the Juba Peace Agreement signed on October 3, 2019. The new government faced great challenges, foremost of which was the economic challenge and facing poverty. After Khartoum reached an agreement with international institutions, the country obtained a percentage of its debts, with pledges of billions of dollars in loans and aid, in what the Prime Minister described as a historic achievement that opens a new page for Sudan with the world. On the other hand, disagreements escalated within the forces of the Declaration of Freedom and Change coalition, which represents the political reference for the transitional government, forcing Hamdok to present his famous initiative National Crisis and Transition Issues, The Way Forward last June, which included security and military sector reform, achieving justice, economy, peace, dismantling the June 30 regime, Omar al-Bashir's regime, fighting corruption, foreign policy and national sovereignty, and the Transitional Legislative Council. Hamdok's initiative did not succeed in uniting the forces of the revolution, at a time when the gap widened between the civil and military components of the transitional government, culminating in the announcement by the head of the Sovereign Council, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, on September 21, that he thwarted a coup attempt led by Major General Abdel Baki el-Bakrawi, holding responsibility from the coup to the failure of civilians, and launched a violent campaign against them, to turn into a battle between civilians and the military in the partnership, which suspended the work of the government for more than a month. On October 25, the head of the Sovereign Council Abdel Fattah al-Burhan surprised Abdullah Hamdok and his government, and arrested him along with a number of his ministers, a member of the Sovereign Council and leaders of the ruling coalition, before reciting a statement declaring a state of emergency, dissolving the Sovereignty Council, the Council of Ministers and State Governments, and the suspension of the constitutional document, with promises to form a government of independent technocrats and to organize elections at the end of the transitional period, shortly after the date of the transition of the presidency of the Sovereignty Council from the military to the civilians. Al-Burhan called his decisions reform, while the political leaders, the Freedom and Change Alliance and the revolutionaries considered them a full-fat coup. Al-Burhan faced widespread popular pressure, and the street received his coup with a broad rejection that was launched before the broadcast of his first statement. He responded with remarkable violence against the processions in which hundreds of thousands participated, which led to the killing of about 47 people by the bullets of the military forces and the injury of hundreds, without stopping the protests and processions adhering to civility and opposition to the control of the military. But al-Burhan was forced to retract most of his decisions due to international, regional, and local pressure, and returned Hamdok to exercise his duties again, and released political detainees. After his return, the Prime Minister rescinded most of the decisions that al-Burhan had taken in his capacity as army chief, according to which he returned the Islamists to the political scene after the revolution had driven them out of the door. However, Hamdok, who returned to his position without his government according to a political agreement with the army chief, lost his popularity and his political incubator, which made him fail to form his government pending a new political consensus, and his presence turned into a catalyst for the popular movement that has not stopped since the coup. Hamdok, who gained popularity that no leader in the history of Sudan has achieved, entered a maze of isolation without any popular support, from which he could not get out or stay in, and no one knows where his labyrinth will end, by resignation or by final submission to the army generals. Despite the half of the coup, the most important and largest segment of the youth continues to protest and affirm that they will continue to